Hello and welcome to another episode of the Being Aloud podcast, or welcome back if you are a regular follower. As always, I'm your host, Bibishay, and I like to think of myself as not just your host, but your companion on this journey. Why? Because if you've been here for any amount of time, you have established with me that life is extremely hard. Extremely hard. And if there's one thing I've learned through this whole conclusion arrival situation, it is that since life is so hard, there is no one better to have a firm, solid relationship with than myself, than yourself. Because at the end of the day, as morbid as that sounds, we are the only people we actually really have. Because sure, we exist in community, and that is really what keeps us afloat during difficult times. But at the end of the day, we go to sleep on our own. We have to live with the consequences of our actions alone. We have to live with the demons in our heads alone. And so I like to invest so much time and energy and intentional mindfulness into making sure that my relationship with myself is healthy and good. So on this podcast, we talk a whole lot about self-development, personal growth, introspection, self-reflection. We talk about things like journaling. But I want to ask you for today 2 questions. I want to ask, have you ever found yourself in a relationship with someone, and in that relationship you feel like you're very unloved, like you're not appreciated, you feel invisible almost, like you're not seen, but you choose to say nothing in order to avoid creating an uncomfortable situation? Because you feel like if you bring this up, then the conversation is just going to be awkward, uncomfortable, it's going to be weird, we don't know how it's going to turn out. So you choose to stay in silence instead and just accept your situation. And then maybe somewhere along the line, you even change the narrative in your own mind to being like, you have to accept the fact that the relationships you see in movies aren't real, and you shouldn't expect such relationships in real life. So this is what actual relationships are like. You shouldn't be striving for more. And then you convince yourself that this is the best anyone can strive for. This feeling of neglect. Maybe you found yourself in this situation. But let me ask you another question and paint another scenario for you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you lash out so aggressively and with so much anger at someone that you love so much, when what you're really feeling is pain and hurt, and what you actually really need to do is go somewhere and cry and let it out, but instead it comes out in this form of extreme anger? Why don't we feel how we really feel? Why don't we give ourselves permission to feel how we really feel? So for today's episode, we're going to talk about that one bottleneck that keeps us from actually putting in the effort to self-reflect and do the inner work. Because we talk about it a lot, but it just doesn't happen, right? What keeps us from feeling how we really feel? Grab yourself a nice cup of coffee or tea, and let's begin today's conversation. Hello, my friend, and welcome back to this week's podcast episode. It's a pretty complicated one for me to talk about because it is an area that I am still developing and I'm still growing and learning. But that's what we do here on this podcast, is that we grow and we develop and we just expand our horizons together. And that's the beauty of having this community. And it's honestly been incredible. So I am currently in the process of understanding the importance of allowing myself to really feel how I really feel instead of dismissing how I really feel for whatever reason. And feelings in general are a very, very sticky, complicated thing because the human psyche is very complicated, right? We're very complex creatures, we're very complex beings, and it's never like a one size fits all, which is why, in my opinion, and this is something we talk about a lot on the podcast, it is so important to be actively engaging in a process of personal self growth and self development, where okay, sure, listening to podcasts is so important and exposing ourselves to, content that makes our minds think and expand is so important. But it's even more important to consciously be taking the time out of our day and out of our week to look within and do the work on ourselves and really be very honest and transparent with how we're feeling. I feel like if any of us are honest with ourselves and like truly honest with ourselves, we will be able to identify so many times when we were feeling one thing, but either denied ourselves the right to feel this way to ourselves, or publicly acted in a way that is the opposite of how we're actually feeling. And I've been thinking so much about this, and then I've been reading articles about like, what is it that stops me from really feeling how I'm feeling? I know for me that these past couple of weeks, for example, a lot was going on and I was very socially stimulated, and I'm like such an introvert, so I need time alone. And so I wasn't given the time to self-reflect on how I'm feeling or what I need. And instead I was on the go in social situations all the time. And that was when I started noticing, wow, I am not responding in the way that I really feel all the time. In fact, so many times I would feel like one way and then put on a completely different front just to get the situation going or just to avoid something that's very uncomfortable. And I noticed things like that with my family. I noticed things like that with my friends. And it's so common, like it's so common to put on a front that's very different. And I feel like part of that is dissociation. And I have read articles and I have done the work even on myself. And I feel like it's just so much easier to avoid how we're really feeling. It's so much easier to pretend to ourselves or pretend to the people around us that we are feeling something that's more digestible, that's easier to reckon with than it is to be like, yep, this is actually how I feel. And dissociation is basically where we will be feeling something or we will be experiencing something, and then we will choose, either consciously or subconsciously in our brains, to separate ourselves from how we're actually feeling, because whatever we're feeling or whatever we're going through is just too uncomfortable. And we do that. I never realized that I did it until I really sat with myself these past couple of weeks and was like, wow, there are so many occasions where I've dissociated. And just like we said in the introduction, if you sit with yourself and be really, really honest for a moment, you're probably going to be able to identify specific situations in your own life where you chose the seemingly easy way of dealing with a situation rather than being very honest with yourself about how you're actually feeling about the situation. And here's the problem with that. Sure, in the moment, it's going to be so much easier to like make it through the difficult, awkward situation, right? And we're going to be like, okay, we dodged the bullet there. Thank goodness. Yay, awkward situation avoided. What happens then is that now our understanding of our own selves is skewed, right? Because dissociating enough times, what that will do is it'll convince us that that's actually how we're feeling. And it will put us in a box of where we're blaming ourselves for things we're not necessarily supposed to be blaming ourselves for, instead of having enough self-respect and requiring a certain degree of acknowledgement and validation from ourselves first, but then from the people who are close to us. Now, I talk about divorce a lot on this podcast because that was kind of the pivotal moment where a lot of who I was shifted, and a lot of the frameworks that I had grown up believing and placing myself within, those frameworks were broken. And and I started seeing myself in a new light. And then I started understanding relationships, all relationships, and human interactions in a brand new light. That being said, and I mentioned this in the divorce episodes before, one of the major issues with my marriage was that I continuously felt unloved. I felt transparent. I felt unseen. I felt unwanted. Like my existence or lack thereof in the marriage made no difference. Whether or not I was there made absolutely no difference to my partner. And what happened was that I eventually dissociated. I learned to dissociate because here I was living with this person, right? I made a lifelong commitment to that person. And this person doesn't want me or doesn't care that I'm there, okay? It was so hard for me to reckon with what that meant. It's harder for me and it's harder for us to sit with the fact that we are unwanted or unloved, which was probably the fact. You know, we were invisible, you know. It was harder for me to reckon with that than it was for me to say, I'm doing something wrong. I need to exert more effort. I need to keep digging in this soil until I find water. It's so much easier to place the blame on myself than to be like, this person has a problem and therefore it is out of my hands. It is out of my control. And so for the longest time, I dissociated within my marriage until through therapy and through self-reflection and doing excruciatingly difficult work, I realized, you know what? This isn't a me problem. This is a them problem. And what I need to do is sit and reckon with how I really feel. I really feel hurt. I feel unworthy. I feel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they were very sticky feelings that no one wants to feel. But it was in feeling those things that I was able to be like, you know what? It's this person's responsibility since they made a vow to me. It is their responsibility to uphold their vows, uphold their promise to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they are not doing that job. What I can sit with is how that's making me feel. But I can now kind of assign responsibility where responsibility is due, and then also take responsibility for my own feelings. So that's just my personal story and anecdote when it comes to dissociation and what that can do when we don't allow ourselves to feel how we really feel. It becomes really messy and really untrue, where we start blaming ourselves for other people's bad behavior, where we start going through life kind of with like a wrong filter in front of our eyes rather than taking responsibility and then assigning responsibility, both where they are due. Now, I wanted to give us 3 reasons why we dissociate, because this seems to be our default. A lot of us dissociate. We just go about our lives not feeling how we're really feeling because it's easier to not feel how we're really feeling. It's easier to not like face the actual consequences and the actual implications of what that means. But I wanted to give us 3 reasons why we dissociate, okay? The first reason is maybe we grew up in an environment that made it unsafe for us to express how we're really feeling. I know that for me, like I've been blessed with a wonderful family, just a great overall situation. But we did have an issue in our family where we don't really express how we feel. It's hard for us to say like, I'm feeling hurt. It's hard for us to say, I'm feeling disappointed, or you really upset me. I remember growing up, if I felt disappointed by my parents, it was easier for me to lash out and be angry than it was for me to cry and show them the weak side of me. And this is just with every family, you know, there are flaws in every single family, and this just happens to be the flaw in my family. So maybe we dissociate, maybe you dissociate because you grew up in an environment that made it unsafe for you to really express how you're really feeling. Or not unsafe, maybe just uncomfortable. So maybe sit and journal on that. What environment did you grow up in? Was it easy for you to express or was it not? So that's one reason. Another reason is that maybe the people in your life have made it very difficult for you to confront. Maybe it wasn't so much about discomfort of like, oh, I'm just uncomfortable sharing how I'm feeling. Maybe it's that when I shared how I felt, I was yelled at, or I was denied the right to feel that way, or whatever. I have examples of relationships in my life where whenever I expressed how I was really feeling, my feelings were completely unvalidated. And I was made to believe that I was crazy for feeling these ways and thinking these things, right? So maybe we grew up in an environment where it just wasn't common for people to express how they're really feeling. Or maybe we grew up in an environment where expressing how we felt was actually dangerous, would actually have repercussions on us that were very dangerous and scary. And then the third reason why we dissociate, which to me is, the most common and also the most difficult and requires the biggest amount of work on ourselves, is that maybe we dissociate because we're afraid of what we're going to find out if we permit ourselves to feel how we're really feeling. Maybe it's easier, like it was easier for me in my marriage to dissociate from feeling extremely heartbroken that I chose to marry someone who didn't see me. Maybe that feeling terrified me. It's easier for me to feel like, no, there's something that's in my control. There's something that I can do to fix this, as opposed to sitting with the reality of the fact that I married someone who was incapable of loving me, incapable of seeing me or validating me or wanting me. And it was terrifying for me to feel like, oh, I made my bed. I am now in this relationship, in this lifelong, till death do us part relationship with someone who doesn't want to see me. It was easier for me to say, no, I'm not even going to look into that. I'm not even going to actually sit with what that meant, or the reality and the implications of what that was. It's easier for me to just say, I need to work on myself. It is my fault I put myself in this situation. Now it is my responsibility, my duty to deny that this is actually what's going on, and instead to find fulfillment on my own. I actually want to tell you a story because I received, in the thick of the terror that was my marriage, I received advice from someone. I will not say who that person is because that's just going to be extremely shocking. But I received advice from someone, and that woman was like, you think that any person's marriage is good? No. The wise woman is the woman who is able to live with the fact that her husband is a man, and by definition, a man is incapable of love, incapable of presence, incapable of selflessness. These are men, honey. Like, what did you expect going into marriage? These are men. That's what a man is. A man needs to be pumped up with ego. You need to be consistently boosting his ego, and that's your job as his wife. But you'd be a fool to expect love in return. You'd be a fool to expect that he's gonna honey, these things are the things of movies. And you know what a wise woman would do? A wise woman is the woman who is able to satisfy her own self. You know what you should do? You should invest in your friendships with the ladies. You should fill every waking moment of every waking day by doing things that you love so that you don't need anything from your husband. Yeah, a moment of silence to just reckon with the messed upness of this advice, because that's the advice that I received. And it was when I received this advice that I was like, hold on. When I heard it from someone outside of myself, this dissociation, when I heard it from someone outside of myself, it's like I heard it. I heard how messed up that is, to settle for a relationship where the default is that I'm going to be unseen, that my sole duty is to pump my husband up with ego and prestige and all these things, all the while expecting nothing in return, expecting no love, expecting no intimacy, no friendship, no partnership at all, because that's just what men are. And I realized when I received this advice that that's what I had been telling myself. In order to make peace with my situation, I was like, Booba, like just erase it from your mind that anyone is actually happy in their marriage, that any marriage is actually healthy. Okay, this is what a healthy marriage is. It's one where the woman feels completely invisible. And what are you going to do about it? This is your responsibility. What are you going to do about it? You need to be self-sufficient. You need to, grow up. You need to be comfortable with this. It's your responsibility because your husband isn't doing anything outside of the ordinary. This is normal. That was dissociation on my part. Anyway, enough with the anecdotes. I have come up with 3 ways where we can learn to feel how we're really feeling. Like 3 grace points, so to speak. We need to give ourselves grace because rewiring our brains to really feel how they're actually feeling, even though that is the hard thing, that is a lesson we all need to learn because, like I said, life is hard. And at the end of the day, we need to know that we have a healthy relationship with ourselves before we can expect to have healthy relationships with other people, A, and B, so that when real life happens, we are not left with a stranger. We are not left feeling like we are strangers in our own bodies. But when real life happens, we are comfortable enough. We are healthy enough. We are at a healthy degree of mental wellness that we can face the difficulties of life. So this is preparation for war, okay? We need to take this very seriously. So I've come up with 3 ways to learn how to feel what we're really feeling. And number 1 is learning to have patience. I feel like we all have dissociation, like we all experience dissociation 1 degree or another, for one reason or another. And so rewiring that in our minds will take time. It will take a lot of like conscious awareness where we're able to sit with ourselves and then reflect and be like, hey, in that moment, I actually dissociated. I didn't allow myself to feel how I felt. And that takes time. And it also takes a lot of rewiring. We need to rewire our neural pathways to think differently. And so learning to extend grace to ourselves and learning to have patience with ourselves is key. Like, I feel like that is the bedrock of everything. And I feel like in my own journey, ever since my own marriage and my everything that I had to go through these past 3 years, it was learning to give myself patience and learning to give myself grace that was maybe the most pivotal, most important lesson and thing that I needed to keep reminding myself of. So first, extend grace and learn to be patient with yourself as you learn how to overcome this dissociation and learn new, better ways. Number 2, and that was huge, and I did a whole podcast episode on that in the past, where you have to learn to self-validate. Validate your own self. Stop waiting for other people to validate your emotions for them to be true. I feel like a lot of the time we avoid feeling how we're really feeling because we want to feel the thing that will be digestible to other people so that we can live in peace and harmony and avoid conflict, right? But you know what? At the end of the day, if someone hurts you, it doesn't matter if they see that they hurt you or not. You feel hurt. You feel extremely disappointed because this person that you love, this person that you expect so much from, hurt you. That's a difficult feeling to feel. We would rather feel like, no, I'm actually not hurt. I'm angry. So now I'm in control of the situation. When the reality is the other person is responsible for making you feel hurt and broken. And that can be very hurtful and disappointing when the stakes are high, when you're in a relationship with someone you love or you're in a friendship with someone you love and expect so much from. Learn to validate your own feelings. And that's when journaling is just especially great. You can learn to give yourself a pep talk in your journal by saying, like, this person made me feel this way. And I'm pretty sure they're not going to see it that way. But I need to validate, you know what? I am hurt. Whether or not that person chooses to acknowledge that or take responsibility for how they made me feel does not take away from the fact that I am feeling hurt. And that comes with patience, because that's the neuropathway that needs to change in our minds. We need permission. We need to give ourselves permission to feel hurt, to feel disappointed, when it's easier to feel angry or to suppress, to feel nothing at all, to numb the pain. When it's easier to feel those things, that is when we need to rewire our minds and say, I will validate my own feelings right now. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling broken. And that's self-validation is key. And the last but not least is we need to learn how to have a very strong sense of self-worth. Because if I don't feel like I'm worthy of good things, then the default belief system in my mind will be to just settle for how other people are making me feel and what other people are making me believe about my own self. And these things aren't necessarily always true. In my marriage, since that is the example we're giving here, because I didn't have a strong sense of self-worth in the beginning, I allowed my partner's behavior to make me believe that I was not worthy of love, that this was the most that I could ever aspire for, because I don't deserve anything better. I don't deserve anything more. And I actually believed that for the longest time. And so it didn't matter how much, self-validation I had it in me to give myself, because if I didn't have a strong sense of self-worth, there would be nothing to validate. All I would be validating would be these dissociative emotions based on someone else's behavior. But gradually, and thank God, gradually, I and through therapy and through journaling and really challenging myself with these thoughts and really sitting with the discomfort, and then also through surrounding myself with a community and a tribe of people who love me and see me for who I am, eventually I was able to rewire my brain and realize my actual self-worth, what I actually deserve, where my value actually lies. And by doing that, by retaining the sense of self-worth, I was able to validate myself and say, hey, I'm actually feeling these feelings because he's making me feel these feelings. And it doesn't matter whether or not he will choose to take responsibility for his actions. At the end of the day, this is how I feel. If he doesn't choose to take responsibility for his actions, well, then that's a completely different conversation. So let me recap the 3 ways by which we can learn to stop dissociating and actually start feeling how we're feeling, regardless of how uncomfortable these feelings are. Number 1, learning to extend grace to ourselves and learning to be patient with ourselves, because it's a long journey of rewiring our neural pathways. Number 2 is learning to validate our own emotions, even if the people around us don't validate us. Learning to be honest with our emotions and say, this is how I feel, regardless of whether or not my feelings are good or bad, whether or not I'm justified. The truth is, this is how I feel. And then we can take the process from there, say, am I justified in feeling this way? Why do I feel this way? This is a whole other branch that comes out of that, which we will discuss in future episodes. And then the last thing is restoring our sense of self-worth. My friend, we are very complex beings. We are not two-dimensional beings. We are always on a journey of self-growth and self-discovery. And we are all we have at the end of the day. So doing the work, taking the time to really look within and analyze and consider how we're living our lives, how we're feeling, how we're thinking, why we're thinking and feeling those things, that is fundamental information that we need to be learning. that is fundamental to our mental well-being. We talk about mental health all the time. It's such a trending topic, but unless we choose to be vulnerable and soft enough to allow ourselves to feel how we're really feeling, our mental well-being will always be at a very stagnant level, and we will not be reaching the maximum that we could be reaching. We all want to be healthy people, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And part of that has to come with a vulnerability and a softness. Just a vulnerability and a softness and an openness to be feeling how we're actually feeling, even when it's extremely difficult, even when it's easier to feel the other thing, or it's easier to buy into the narrative that other people have convinced us that we should be buying into. It is our responsibility and our duty to really be feeling how we're feeling, to give our emotions the time of day. Thank you so much for listening and watching this podcast episode. As always, I'm your host, Bibishay. Super happy to be here having these difficult conversations with you, because together we can be better people for ourselves and for our communities in this crazy and messy and messed up life. So, as always, if you enjoyed today's episode and if you are in support of the Being Aloud podcast, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, especially on YouTube, because that is where we can have real vulnerable conversations with one another, ping-ponging ideas in the comments section. So please like and subscribe, and then leave a comment, share your thoughts with me so we can grow this conversation and take it to the very next level. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you again next time.